As retailers entered the lockdown in March 2020, a small, diverse group of Canadian thought leaders gathered to virtually speculate, collaborate, and share their insights on the waves of disruption facing retailers. The Business of Retail podcast emerged as an unflinching strategic alternative to the conventional discourse, revealing challenges in the headlines and exploring new, unconventional paths for all facets of the retail industry. Now, here's the panel.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Business of Retail podcast series. We've got a group here, and we're going to be launching into a discussion today. I'm going to ask a few questions. We're going to get some answers. I might chime in as well. So the first question we're going to be asking here is COVID-19 has been obviously something which has affected the retail industry substantially. Is there an acceleration of consumers to e-commerce at the moment, which I think there is, we've seen statistically, and is this going to be something that's permanent?
That I don't believe that the acceleration, what gets done through this COVID-19, there will be some trade-off, but I don't believe that the public is going to, can emerge into e-commerce and stay there permanently. I believe that the public wants to feel, taste, touch, explore, and get out of their homes and see others, and they want to get dressed and be seen by others. I think, the idea that e-commerce is going to take over traditional retail completely is a fallacy and a myth created by people who want it to happen and are selling something. So that's my pitch.
I agree 100%. And I think for a long time that's been I think it was the Atlantic Monthly that first talked about the retail apocalypse. And then it just is such a cool term, right? I actually like it as a phrase, but it's not happening. What is happening is a massive acceleration of change to a much more integrated system where we are using physical space and online, and that had to happen, and it's happening faster. But I don't think I think there's a step change up because we've been kind of pushed into that as consumers, and we're also finding that there's an imperfect online world. I think the idea that online was this panacea, this pure panacea that would replace an imperfect physical retail situation, we're now learning that there's a lot of glitching and friction that happens online as well, which will improve over time. But I think now that we're getting forced to experience that, we're going to center back on something that is more of a hybrid, as you said, George.
I agree with both of you. I think consumers still want that retail experience. They want to touch and feel. They want to be a part of it. But I do think that there could be potentially a hybrid model where you see, brick and mortar and digital play, potentially with, more advancements in terms of representing a storefront type look, whether it's through virtual reality or some type of augmented situation. I think that can help consumers navigate and get a feel and a sense for it. But I don't think that we're going to walk away from the brick and mortar. I think it's just too important. I definitely think there'll be a shift in our focus. And I do think that, to David's point, we need to see more improvements on the e-com front because we're all experiencing the challenges right now of trying to shop in those environments. And if a retailer's got it right, it's really easy. If not, it's a lot of frustration, and in many cases, it forces consumers to have to go out to retail to sort of get what they need from it.
I think it's a really teasy question because, the word permanent means like, have we made a step change and that's the end of the game? I think during COVID, for many non-essential retailers, their only option was I have to offer my service online. And there we found that many retailers were not set up to either do it in the first place, or if they could struggle to do it, to actually scale their proposition. And on top of that, could they actually be in a better position than just staying shut and not doing it at all? So I think that when we think about this question, I think we ought to put some broad timescales around it, like in the next few months to an event happens, and then that event, whatever that event will be, will that sort of impact on the uptake of e-commerce. What I think as an individual, as a consumer, is I've always shopped on Amazon for a long time. That I was disappointed when their own proposition went down. But for people who have either shopped on it for a long time or were new to it during COVID because they were forced to explore the internet, I think that there's a certain degree of convenience that might appeal to some people who not necessarily don't want to go to the stores, but just want, if there's an element of friction in their perception of going to a particular store, they may shop that brand online, especially if it's for something of a staple nature. If it's something where I have to go in and touch and feel and explore and discover it, and, typically most consumers won't impulse shop online. I do. I think I'm slightly unusual because I impulse shop like crazy on Amazon. I don't do that in store, but I think it's allowed a certain amount of convenience to enter into people's life who didn't have it before, who now experienced it, good or bad or indifferent. But it was, the bad experience or mediocre experience or brilliant experience that they had is now being ranked against the friction of going to a store, masking up, putting your gloves on, standing in the queues, going down aisles in a certain direction. I think it's in the mix. So I think that there has been a movement towards e-commerce. I suspect my feelings are that movement will continue, but it may not continue at anywhere near the pace it has over the last 3 or 4 months.
Why is it that we're now at a point where we're moving so fast in our consumption, I guess, of information and knowledge that we have to, in the effort to simplify a complex situation, I think there's a tendency to actually dumb down the whole situation. And what I mean by that is, in a mixed model for retail, anyone that you see talking about it, say, I won't name technology companies, but when they talk about it, they're still talking about a retailer having a mixed channel. But I think in reality, as we shop, we're going to have some moments where we're going to buy something only online, maybe always. And we've come to that kind of, to me, like in music, basically, is a good example. But there's going to be other things in our consumer day to day or month to month where we may actually only go to stores. And then there's going to be other times it's in between. So if it's really a consumer centric lens, we have to be able to understand that we're complex and it's going to be complex, but you don't hear that story told very often. And I think that's one of the challenges, how to just admit that this is complex and the outcome is going to be also complex. It's not going to be a unilateral sort of a uni-mode answer down the road.
I think the biggest challenge is convincing the consumer, what's best for them. I think that everybody's trying to convince the consumer that the e-commerce channel is, the best alternative. Right now with COVID-19, it might be. Right now, if you have the fear factor of going to stores is pretty high right now. Right, you're wearing masks, you're in a lineup. Some people are wearing gloves. Some people respect the social distancing. Others don't. Some stores do a great job of managing lineups and managing traffic inside the store. Others don't. And those differences are creating, an opportunity for e-commerce. But I'm not convinced yet that transition is permanent. And I'll tell you why. And I think that there's a high level of inconvenience that's happening as well with e-commerce. Right, when you buy something, and I think Christine, you mentioned it in one of our past discussions that, you buy something, you want to return it. Try to return it. Right, I mean that could take time. Try to get your credit back. Right. And it depends on how big the organization is and how well structured they are in managing all those little, nuances of being a retailer, a physical retailer online. It's not easy for them. And, the public. So there's a high level of dissatisfaction that happens too. So if I'm anticipating I'm going to get something delivered to my home, and let's just say it gets done in a couple of days, it gets delivered in a couple of days. Great. That level of convenience has been achieved. But what if it doesn't fit? What if I got the product that doesn't actually work, right? What if there's no instructions? I mean, all of those things that could go wrong will go wrong, and there's nobody there to solve it for you. And I think that is the biggest conundrum for e-commerce. And unless they have a physical outlet, and many don't, how are you going to resolve this? How are you going to build credibility and loyalty behind your brand when there is no way to actually communicate with a physical person. I think those are going to be the biggest challenges. And until they can figure all that out, I agree that the hybrid model is there. And who knows, maybe somebody will be smart enough to buy, a couple of hundred independent retailers to close that loop. But until that happens, you're going to end up having some serious fallbacks. The public is learning right now. It's not a perfect model, right? We've always been believed that it would be, right? But it's all happened so fast with COVID-19 that no one was ready. Absolutely no one was ready. Amazon scrambling. Look, my son orders stuff from Amazon, and we had a van show up, 2 people in the van. One person was loaded up with product up to here in the passenger side, right? So all I could think to myself, this is a nightmare. They have no, it didn't look like it was under control to me. So I think that there's challenges until they sort this all out, right? And the public, and I think it's a great learning experience for everyone who's just an e-commerce based business to learn, understand that I'm going to have challenges if something doesn't work. How do I solve it for the customer?
George, I think one of the reasons also, it's not just the tech companies. I think the online model has been very enticing for retailers and brands because of the margins. Like it's kind of, if you have a little fantasy in your head that you don't have to invest in real estate or anywhere near the staffing levels or inventory, wouldn't that be awesome? So when you think about it, it's not really customer centric, it's retailer centric, but it's very compelling. And when you first start one, and Christine and I won't mention who the client organization was, but we were dealing with a lot of upstart brands that were selling direct to consumer. And it's kind of a repeating story. And I think Indochino faced that, and Frank and Oak as well, that from day one where you have zero, and then you start getting clicks on a website, and those clicks now translate to sales, you start seeing this growth happen from zero. It's pretty exciting. And in 1 week, a month, a year, you can just see this exponential curve, but they all hit a plateau at some point where they either have to invest a lot of money in online advertising or do something else or go wholesale or whatever. The growth ends pretty sharply. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of they're all going to see it at some point. I guess my question I'd have for Craig is, the wild card here is real estate, right? So if there's sort of a crash and rents drop significantly, that might actually be that enticement factor. The flip side might be if malls kind of get reconverted into other use because it goes so dark, then we may have a shortage of space. I'd be curious what Craig's seeing from his point of view at Retail Insider.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I talked to one retailer saying they're looking at some of their physical spaces being quasi-fulfillment centers now, as we talked about, and that there are opportunities to almost micro-fulfill, if you can call it that, from retail stores. Rents may come down, but they're not going to go down to a point that they're going to become negligible in terms of a cost for a retailer. David's Tea announcing that they're closing 90% of their locations or will not reopen 90% of their locations is incredible. The fact they're keeping 18 stores when they had 243 in Canada and the United States, but keeping 90% or 10% of their Canadian stores. The cost of real estate for retailers, if it's not optimal and they're not doing the sales that they want, it doesn't make sense in some instances to have nearly as many locations in terms of chains. Or in the case of an individual retailer, the question is, can they do sales online? There's a sneaker retailer, I should say, in Toronto that said, well, during COVID, we shut our stores. We realized that we can actually be quite profitable online. We're closing our Queen Street location, and we're going to do this online, and we're going to do some pop-ups here and there. We're going to do brand activations. They're going to create some excitement. And I thought that was really interesting because they are getting rid of that leasing side in terms of having a longer term physical lease for that space, and rather they're looking at becoming more of a digital retailer. But speaking of digital retail generally, I think we are at such a pivotal time right now. Things have changed. We've seen COVID closures. We've seen a movement towards a change in law enforcement and equality. we're seeing, I think, a real societal shift right now. And, what is brand loyalty going to be in the future? We had brands that were popular before. I don't know, if people will be making those changes in terms of, say, going to a new brand. From an online standpoint, if a retailer can't get it right, people are going to go elsewhere, and they may quickly move their loyalties. And that's quite scary for those businesses that haven't gotten the online process right, I think. And, Amazon, I've been doing some studying, and the growth year over year has been astronomical. I'm absolutely blown away. And, they may very well come out of this ahead. We're seeing incredible investments from Walmart, which, really wants to compete, the benefit of Walmart having physical stores. But I think overall, physical retail is still going to be important to retailers, but I think it's going to have to be really great physical retail, because if you think about how distracted we are now, a lot of people sat at home. People are on social media more now than ever, whether or not it's Instagram, TikTok. There's so many distractions out there, and so many things that are interesting, that if you've got a store that is boring and you can buy something online, why are you going to go to the store unless it's either convenient or you're getting, say, a luxury experience, which is part of that experiential retail? So looking at the big picture and looking more long term, I think we're going to see fewer stores. I don't think physical retail is going to go away, but I think that the retailers that do survive this are going to be doing it better in a physical aspect, and are going to have hopefully as seamless as possible online experience, and being able to integrate the two. So I think it's going to be a really interesting time. We're going to see a major movement into virtual reality, which I think is interesting. We're working with a company there. Again, artificial intelligence I've spoken about before. I think that the next couple of years, we're going to see an acceleration of some of the trends. I think within months, we're moving years into the future, which in some respects is very exciting, and in some respects very scary.
I think George has spoken often about the basics, so you can do all the augmented and virtual reality, et cetera, but having the stock on the there for the customer like that, and I guess Gary's spoken about this as well in the past. I think you need your basics in play before you can start running too far ahead, or you'll lead to disappointment. You'll be setting expectations that isn't this new and modern, and then the failures in the product itself or the delivery.
Yeah, and on top of that, even if you're getting the solution, well enough or good enough for consumers say, yeah, they're okay, they're a viable option. The costs when you close stores, you save on the estates and the staff, but you actually just move the staff into a warehouse, and you're picking some distant point over there, and you're having to put each item into a separate case and shipping it maybe across the country. And all of a sudden, whereas your stores gave you an advantage for maybe same day, if not next day service, you're suddenly, back to the old, I've got a DC in Toronto. It takes me 5 days to get to Vancouver, assuming I can find a carrier that can do that. And to accelerate that pace is very, very expensive. So to David's point about the margins on singles, when you're just shipping a small number, seems to be, great, fantastic. But as soon as you start doing it at scale, you suddenly encounter different types of problems. And I think one of the items I keep coming back to, and we can talk about some of the inconvenience or convenience of online, is the actual financial accounting. Are we informed when we go online to see how much this will actually cost us? Is this a viable channel? Because if it isn't a viable channel, and we're swapping our eggs from stores, closing stores like left, right, and centre, maybe slim them down, and we're going online, are we just actually going to bleed money at a fast rate of knots? And somebody's going to say, no, we're going to close your business. Your brand has got to die. It's not making money.
Just back to Craig's point about the number of stores, I've always believed that in Canada, particularly if you were a chain, you never really needed more than 25 to 30 stores. I think anybody that ventured into 100 or 200 stores, you were really stretching your brand. And now all of a sudden, with e-commerce, things the way they've changed, COVID pushed the envelope, right? And, there are a lot of retailers stuck with a number of units that no longer make sense. The economics no longer make sense. And going back to your point, Gary, about the financials here, think about it. If I'm going to push e-commerce, and I'm stuck with 100 stores and I only need 25, right? And I can't exit, that's a problem, right? So how do I erode I might erode my volume. I may erode my profits. I will erode the volume and profit out of those stores. How can I stay in business? You can't. Very challenging.
Well, George, I don't know too many executives that I've been speaking with in the last 10 years who actually assess the market potential. And maybe that's just in our conversation. They didn't share it and they are, and it's something they're keeping close to their vest. But without that in mind, it's alluring to kind of say, hey, for us to even become a modern e-com play, we need X amount of revenues to cover the cost of that. Well, look at this math model of store revenue per cost. We need to open up 100. And it used to be that way to get economic order quantities on buying, right? So it's almost like presuming you have limitless opportunity. And I think what you're pointing out is that's not the case. And that's what has got people into trouble. And I think it also matters what category. Like, I think clothing is so overexposed and saturated that talking about it might be different than talking about home furnishings, for example.
Yep.
And to an extent, that when you're in a retailing old network, for the other word, before e-commerce, we knew within our business the type of category we had. We knew where the peak was, and it just normal routine was bring the stock in early, get it stacked up, and push it through. E-commerce doesn't work like that. You may have some peaks, but in between, you don't know if you're going to have a peak or a trough, a long trough. You don't know how to resource it. You don't know whether or not you should be investing in an automated solution or not. Automated solutions may take 5-10 years to recover the costs. So it's a very problematical situation. And if the worst case situation is if a retailer thinks, I'll just bolt it in somehow to my existing distribution network and somehow we make it work, and if we haven't got that visibility of cost because we only see it maybe at the difference between the store and the consumer, like the residential address or click and collect, we're not actually seeing the full cost. And if we're doing it from a warehouse, perhaps we get more visibility. But again, do we actually account for the area in the warehouse, the resource in the warehouse that e-commerce takes? Because it is very expansive. If you have 10,000 SKUs or available for pedestrian picking, that's a huge footprint in a modern DC.
So what's the bottleneck? If you're a chain who can't, right now, let's say you're sitting here today and you don't have the investable funds like Walmart's announced to upgrade their system, is there a path forward? And are there technology options that are declining in cost per, like, total cost of implementation? I guess is probably the question I would have if I was leading a specialty chain in Canada right now.
Well, I think Craig would agree that a lot of chains out there right now, they can't raise capital, right? So any idea of just buying inventory, and I think it's a stretch to even think for them to think about technology if they can't even get the money to buy inventory. But I've often thought that the technology companies that really want to invest in retail, they may just want to partner up with a retailer.
I was wondering if you would say, I was kind of hoping someone would say that.
I think that is a path forward for a lot of them. If, you want to prove your mettle, if you will, as a technology company, that what you have to offer is scalable and profitable, then that's the path to go by. And that, I don't see how a retailer that's struggling today can do it by themselves.
Or what about retailers that are non-competing themselves, joining forces for back of house type systems if they're not trying to be world-class with it? They just need to be. Yeah. I think there needs to be a lot of out of the box thinking going on right now.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes back to a point that you hear me go on and on about reinvention is when we just look at e-commerce as a unit, as stores as a unit, and we might talk about blurring the edges and stuff, what is our retailing proposition? How are we going to go to market in a world which is incredibly uncertain at the moment? We don't know if we're going to go into a second lockdown. We don't know if we're going to get a vaccine. We don't know pretty much anything. So how do we know the only thing we do probably know is consumers are changing their thinking pattern. We're not quite sure how that might develop at an individual consumer level, particularly at segment level, which we're, as retailers, probably more interested in segments. So retailers are faced with some really challenging problems, but it's so easy to just get involved in the firefight, fill the shelf, do a bit more e-commerce, do this, do that, because it's all doing as opposed to thinking. Thinking is a way forward on this, but I suspect that many retailers are doing some of the thinking, but aren't seeing the big picture to say we need to reinvent and see if e-commerce is part of this puzzle, and if it is, how does it fit in?
Well, I think that might be a teaser for a follow-on podcast, Gary, which is what are the modes of thinking going to have to be? What's changing at the mental models and leadership models in retail that are the underpinning to how they work out of this?
Yep.
I just wanted to say that I like what Dave was saying about the mental models, but at the same time, I remember taking a program at MIT, and it had to do the Internet of Things. And the common question to go back to Gary, common question was, so what else can we do? It's always the question you have to ask. What else can we do? Yeah. Right? And if you stop asking that question, you stop challenging yourself, you start thinking in an innovative way, right? And it pushes you outside of your comfort zone. But part of the problem for a lot of organizations is, what are the parameters of the leadership, mental models of the leaders that if it's fear of failure, then you're not going to allow that thinking to go outside of that box, right? Out of that fear level. It always stops you.
And I think building on that, we've all had things that have enabled us to be successful in the past, but we're in such a chaotic breakpoint from a linear path right now that those who made their success in their career on, say, a lean, maybe not formally, but a lean model, like an efficiency model, keep rolling out. This isn't the time and place for that right now. But if that's the go-to, it's going to be hard to think otherwise. I think right now is more playbook mode. Like, how do we really, like the idea of partnering up with a technology company to create a solution, like an actual co-invested solution, that takes different kind of thinking. And this isn't a critique to anyone out there. There's a lot of different skills, but I think there's a different thing happening right now that may not be the comfort zone for a lot of traditional retail leaders. So that's all I'll say on that. And on the customer side, I think we're the one thing that really is lucky, I think, for both online and offline retail is, I think, for at least a little while longer, we're incredibly forgiving as shoppers right now. Like, we get that there's chaos going on in the stores and online, and even though we're complaining about it, we're not really super complaining about it. But I think that has a shelf life itself. I think there's going to be a point where we just get sick of the thing not getting fixed. But we've got a little room to work with. So I think that's a good opportunity.
I agree. I think consumers right now are frustrated and challenged, but because of COVID, have sort of accepted the fact that they have to work around parameters. But I think going forward, there's got to be a lot of sharpness in terms of what products are brought to market, consumers shifting and changing, the breadth of offering that might have been out there before. And the throwing the darts out and hoping something will stick, like, that's got to change. There's got to be a really pointed point of view. And I think the back to basics comment is, I think, going to be really important, because consumers don't have a lot of excess income right now. And there's a fear factor of the unknown of the future. So I think we're gravitating to things that we can do, that we can maybe control, being outside, doing the things that, bring us closer to family. But there's just a lot of things, I think, that are changing right now, and consumers are going to help drive, like, what is going to be acceptable go forward. So I think that that's something that, on the retail front, both brick and mortar and digitally, has to be sort of considered.
Yeah, I mean, something I found really interesting. I've mentioned some of this before, but I keep talking to different retailers and brands, and one thing that I'm finding really fascinating right now is some of the high end brands, and these can be used like strategies can be used as with all price points to a degree. But what I've been blown away by is these brands are saying in some cases that they're seeing record breaking high sales. There's a boutique called Miu Miu on Bloor Street, its own Prada sub brand. Their sales are triple what they were last year, but it's not everyone just coming into the store. They've got the storefront, which is beautiful, but they're selling, to people in the store as well as through apps like WeChat, WhatsApp, texting people. So they're in the store. They've got this, $2,300 bag that Jessica and I looked at on Sunday when we were in the store. Take a photograph of it, send it to the customer. They're like, "Oh, that's lovely. I'll buy it." It's really fascinating to see how online and in store is, it's merging together. I don't even know if we can use the term omni-channel anymore, but now what we're seeing with some of these brands, and it's across the country. I've talked to brands in Vancouver doing very well. Tiffany at West Edmonton Mall, sales are up 40% over last year. Foot traffic might be down, but people, when they come in, they're spending. And in some cases, when you're, reaching out to the customer by their mobile phone, creating that relationship, people are spending there as well. People want to feel special. In the short term, people are not traveling internationally for the most part. Those that have money have more money perhaps than they had before. Some people have gotten very rich during this time, especially those that are, invested in technology or stocks that have exploded. And I just think it's interesting how some of these best practices are being implemented quickly and with incredible success, especially, at this time. That really shocked me because we thought all retail sales, other than maybe grocery and pharmacy, would be going down. But, why are people buying $3,000 bags or, jewelry? The jewelry and watch stores at the Yorkdale Shopping Center, they're nailing it. They're doing incredibly well, and they're selling across both channels. I just find that to be really, really quite fascinating.
Craig, I think if you use a metaphor, and I always think of ecosystems, right? Now, I've often talked to you guys about the idea of retailing being an ecosystem. But if you think of, when we think of climate change or global warming, it's not that every single day and every year the planet's getting hotter. What the science tells you is the variation gets far more spiky and unpredictable. And I think that's what we're dealing with right now, is the unpredictability. So yeah, you're going to find some amazing momentary successes. Whether or not they sustain those for the years to come, I don't know. We're also going to see others we thought should do well plummet. And I think it's that chaotic moment right now that is going to take different navigating than being able to predict with a projection. Yeah, watches are going to surge, and invest in those next year. So I'm kind of not surprised at the same time, but I think we got to build off the stories and learn from the ones that are working and why they're working.
And some brands, I think, could be at risk merely by their messaging. Another high-end brand, Marni, ran an ad campaign which is being absolutely blasted all over social media. They're saying it's racist. We've seen other brands that have struggled with accusations as well. And ultimately, in terms of consumer perception, if a brand is seen as doing something bad or being insensitive or something negative, if enough consumers feel that way, a brand can go from being hot to not. I mean, if say Lululemon, which would be a hot brand, did something that consumers thought was like, "Oh my God, that's terrible." I mean, there have been some controversies around stretchy pants and whatnot, but if something were to be perceived as racist or something, that could sink that brand.
You can't ignore the social and environmental issues anymore.
So Craig, maybe for a follow-on show, I just think it'd be fascinating to start to itemize what are the key drivers of the volatility we're seeing, like what are the levers, and then what to do about them. But I can get you off on me and everyone else on another tangent. I think you got to wrap this up.
That's our segment today. This is the Business of Retail podcast series. We've got the group here, and I want to say thank you so much, everyone, for being part of this today, and we'll be back with more of this.
You have been listening to the Business of Retail podcast, an unflinching strategic alternative to the conventional industry discourse. Thank you for joining us. For more information, please go to www.thebusinessofretail.ca.